Welcome to the Sober and Happy podcast, where we talk about all things recovery related, how to navigate the challenges that we'll face along the way on our journey towards our best lives, and how we can go from living a life of simply just being sober to a life where we're both sober and happy. I remember in early sobriety sitting on my couch after a particularly hard day of fighting cravings. It started innocent enough as a random thought when I was out to lunch with coworkers and saw a waitress walk by with a beer, and I figured I could just white-knuckle my way through the craving. But none of my old tricks worked. I called people, I went to a meeting, and yet here I was on my couch that night, still fighting off the urge. And then the thought hit me, is this what the rest of my life is going to be? Just fighting through every single craving with sheer willpower? Because if it is, I don't know if I could do this. That night, I didn't drink, but I also didn't feel like I won anything. I walked away exhausted, drained, and terrified that if a craving could hit me that hard, there was no way I could make it long term. The next morning, I actually felt hungover as the stress did a number on my mind and body. That's when I knew something had to change. I couldn't just fight my way through sobriety. I needed a better way to deal with these moments, one that didn't leave me feeling like I was barely hanging on. I knew there had to be a better way, so I started searching, and that's when I discovered mindfulness. Mindfulness is one of the most powerful tools we could use in recovery, but it's also one of the most misunderstood. When people hear the word, they often think of meditation retreats, hours of silence, or something that only works for monks sitting on a mountaintop. But in reality, mindfulness is something that could help you in the moments that matter most, when cravings hit, when anxiety takes over, or when you feel like you're barely holding on. So today, we're going to break down exactly why mindfulness is such a game changer in recovery, how it actually rewires your brain, and most importantly, how you could start using it right now, even if you've never tried it before. So buckle up. This is going to be a great episode. Welcome back. Before we dive in, let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you're standing in the middle of a storm. The wind is howling, the rain is pouring down, and you could barely see 2 feet in front of you. That's what being an active addiction could feel like. Chaotic, overwhelming, and out of control. Now, mindfulness doesn't make the storm go away, but it's like finding an umbrella in the middle of the storm. Doesn't stop the rain, but it gives you a moment of clarity, a bit of shelter where you can catch your breath and figure out your next move. Now, what exactly is mindfulness? At its core, it's really simple. It's about being present in the moment, fully aware of what's happening both inside and around you without judgment. And that last part, without judgment, that's crucial, especially in recovery. Because let's face it, we've all beaten ourselves up enough already, haven't we? And when I am hardest on myself, it usually comes from these two places, the past and the future. We either spend our time obsessing over past mistakes, feeling guilt and shame for everything we did, or we're anxious about the future, wondering if we'll ever be able to do this, if we'll ever be able to be truly happy sober. What we're not doing is living right now, in this moment. And that's where mindfulness comes in. The science behind mindfulness and recovery is fascinating. Researchers have found that regular mindfulness practice actually changes our brain structure. It strengthens the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of your brain responsible for decision-making and impulse control. Think about that for a second. We're not just talking about feeling better. We're talking about literally rewiring our brains to support our recovery better. Mindfulness is like going to the gym but working out our brains. Mindfulness has also been shown to reduce something called experiential avoidance. That's a fancy term for our tendency to try to escape or avoid thoughts, feelings, or sensations that make us uncomfortable. Sound familiar? Yeah, that's pretty much the definition of addiction, isn't it? Practicing mindfulness teaches us to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to numb or run away from it. But here's where it gets really interesting. One of the biggest challenges in recovery is dealing with stress and cravings, right? Well, mindfulness gives us a superpower here. It helps us create a pause, a space between a trigger and our response. I remember early in recovery, before I learned about mindfulness, just about anything could set me off. A stressful day at work, an argument with a friend, someone cut me off in traffic, or even an annoying post from a stranger on social media would trigger me and automatically lead to thoughts of drinking. There was no gap between stress and craving. However, mindfulness taught me to observe these thoughts without immediately reacting to them. Let me share a technique that's been a game changer for many people in recovery. It's called urge surfing. Imagine your craving is like a wave. Instead of trying to fight it or run from it, you observe it like a surfer watching a wave approach. You notice when you feel it in your body, how intense it is, and you just watch it. Here's the amazing part. Just like every wave eventually breaks and dissipates, every craving will pass. When you practice this enough, you start to develop a different relationship with your cravings. They stop being these overwhelming forces that control you. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, this sounds great, but I can't sit for 2 minutes, let alone meditate. Here's the good news. I suck at sitting still for meditation too. I even went to a 12-week meditation class and I still suck at meditation. Mindfulness doesn't have to be hour-long meditation sessions. Start small, and I mean really small. Try this. Next time you're sitting outside, take a moment just to observe. Feel the warmth of the sun or the coolness of the breeze on your skin. Listen to the sounds around you, the birds chirping, the distant traffic, leaves rustling. Notice the way that the light changes as the clouds move. That's mindfulness, simply being where you are, fully present in the moment. The beauty of mindfulness is that you can practice it anywhere, anytime. Waiting in line at a grocery store? Perfect time to practice. Stuck in traffic? Another opportunity. Walking your dog? You guessed it. These everyday moments become your training ground. What we're really talking about here is developing a different relationship with our thoughts and emotions. In active addiction, we often try to escape difficult feelings. Mindfulness teaches us that we could experience discomfort without being overwhelmed by it. It's like building an emotional muscle. The more you practice, the stronger you get. Let me tell you about a listener who wrote to me recently, which sparked the idea of doing this episode. She reached out to me because she was terrified of an upcoming family gathering where she knew alcohol would be everywhere. In the past, these situations have always been a struggle for her. Watching everybody drink, feeling left out, dealing with the nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, she could have just one. She told me that she'd been obsessing over it for days, running scenarios in her head. What if someone offers me a drink? What if I feel awkward? What if the cravings hit too hard? What about the family members who don't seem to support me while quitting drinking? She could already feel the anxiety building, convincing herself that this was going to be horrible. And honestly, I could relate because I've been there and I know how exhausting it is to fight against those thoughts. So I introduced her to mindfulness. Instead of fighting the fear or trying to suppress it, I told her to simply notice it, to acknowledge the thoughts and feelings without letting them take over. I walked her through the urge surfing process and encouraged her to explore mindfulness more on YouTube. She reported back after that weekend and said that although the anxiety was still very present, it didn't have control over her. She said she developed a plan that when the anxiety showed up, she would just take a deep breath, then feel her feet on the ground. Then she'd pay attention to everything that was happening around her, conversations, the sounds, even the scent of the food. And instead of getting caught in the mental spiral of what if, she focused on shifting her energy to what is. And she said something incredible happened. Instead of getting caught up in the anxiety and cravings, she was able to notice these feelings arise, and then, surprisingly, she watched them fade away. She wasn't fighting them. She wasn't judging herself for having them. She was just aware of them. And in that awareness, the cravings lost their power. And most importantly, she was able to enjoy her day with her family. That's the power of mindfulness in action. It doesn't mean the thoughts or urges don't come. It means that they no longer control you. The research backs this up too. Studies have shown that people in recovery who practice mindfulness have lower rates of relapse, better emotional regulation, and, this is important, higher levels of satisfaction in their sober life. Because recovery isn't about just staying sober. It's about building a life worth staying sober for. It is the core of a sober and happy life. Mindfulness isn't a magic cure-all for addiction, but it is a powerful tool in our recovery toolbox. It helps us manage stress, regulate our emotions, cope with cravings, and make better decisions. It teaches us to be present in our lives rather than always running. And perhaps most importantly, it helps us develop a kinder, more compassionate relationship with ourselves. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave you with a challenge. For the next week, try this simple practice. Set aside just 3 minutes each morning. Sit somewhere comfortable. Close your eyes and focus on your breath. When your mind wanders, and it will, that's completely normal. Just gently bring your attention back to your breathing. 3 minutes. I know you could do this. Remember, mindfulness isn't about emptying your mind or achieving some perfect state of calmness. It's about showing up for your life moment by moment with awareness and compassion. And in recovery, that will make all the difference. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. If you are, do me a huge favor. Grab your phone and text one person who you think might benefit from listening to this episode. That would mean the world to me. New episodes come out each Friday, so I look forward to connecting with you next week. And as always, thank you so much for listening and keep living sober and happy.